Hello, and welcome back to the Wishing You Well podcast, where we help you navigate your wellness journey each and every week. I'm Amy Albero.
And I'm Catherine Van Eyck. We are both licensed therapists, and we are answering listener questions today. We're back with an Ask the Therapist episode. And this week, we have answers to two questions, one about grief and one about people's comments and questions around breakups.
Yeah, I love these questions. Thank you for submitting them. And you can submit your listener questions to wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com. So we're going to get real into it today. Living and well life is to put together, authentic.
We feel it.
Take care of ourselves. But before we do, we need to check in. Catherine, how's your self-care? How's it going? What's it looking like?
Okay, I have two fun dessert self-cares I want to talk about. One of the dessert self-cares is that I am taking the day off and going to the US Open next week.
Awesome.
And I'm so excited. This is something like I did a decent amount when I was a kid. I got to go to the US Open, like either whether it was like the first week going to like a lot of day games or day matches or night matches, but like either one, I love tennis. And like, this is just something so exciting for me. I just love it so much. And being there is such a cool experience. So I'm going to US Open, and yeah, like that's fun. That's my dessert. The other dessert that self-care that I have is that I'm spending some time with a friend, a few friends tonight, actually. One of them lives out of the country and she's here for a little bit visiting. She's like, all of them are childhood friends of mine, and we haven't been able to get together. The summer's just been like wild and everything. And I've just been like trying to nail them down. Like, can I just hang out with you all like maybe one more time before I hibernate myself for a little bit and like I'm not as available? So I'm doing that. We're going to like a neighborhood restaurant that we all like to go to as kids. And so yeah,
so nice.
Too fun
so
desserts.
Nostalgic.
Yeah. Both of them, I guess, are nostalgic self-care.
I love it. Well, if our listeners can't tell, we are recording this slightly ahead of schedule, as Catherine's referencing this summer and the US Open. And my self-care kind of relates to this season, but I think it's actually, for the time that this is getting recorded, even more of a good self-care reminder to our listeners. I'm pointing at you if you're watching us on YouTube. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be aggressive. My point. But it's not a treat. It's very much appetizer and kind of like a boring, bland appetizer self-care. And that is drinking water. I feel like I'm usually so on top of it with staying hydrated. For whatever reason, I mean, for a couple of reasons that I am aware of, but I've like kind of fallen like into just a period where it's like a little bit more challenging to drink water, to remember, to finish, like all of that stuff. And so my self-care is drinking enough water every day. And again, time that you all are listening to this, when it's getting a little bit chilly out and like, water can be cold. It's not as appealing to drink water. So it's so important to still stay hydrated. Like you still sweat, like you still lose hydration. You're still getting dehydrated, even in this weather, even if you're not like sweating out in the sun. So just a little PSA to stay hydrated, but that is definitely my goal, to stay on top of it. Focus on that.
I mean, and the fact that you're noticing that that's slipping now and we're not even there yet as we're recording this, like, and that's also going to happen to me then. That's great foresight to have and great to be thinking about when it comes to your self-care. Those little things can really slip so easily.
Yeah. And I have already been, yes, take a sip. Cheers. But I have already been thinking about like that fall into winter time of hydration and kind of getting excited to like infuse my water a little bit, or like sipping on some herbal teas and things like that, like other ways to kind of like get some water in my system that aren't just kind of boring. So I'm excited about that already. So
Nice.
yes. So that's my self-care this week. A little tiny but necessary appetizer, like the bread basket on a table. Like it's got to be there.
I love that. Well, maybe this is maybe it's a good thing that, okay, also as we've been recording, I think maybe yesterday or 2 days ago, Starbucks released their pumpkin spice latte for the fall, which like in August, that's a little presumptuous. A lot of us aren't thinking about pumpkins and spices yet, but and just like that warmth and coziness that like people associate with something like that. But at the same time, like maybe it is a good idea. Maybe it's a good idea not for somebody to jump in and say like, oh, well, now like I'll start drinking those, and gross, I don't drink those. But sorry to anyone that likes them. Just too sweet. What I'm trying to get at is like, maybe it's nice that they release those things early, because it does get your mind thinking like, ooh, things are going to shift for me soon. Things are going to change, and I'm going to have to like move out of summer mode and into fall mode and into that cozier time. And what am I going to do about it? How am I going to shift around the way that I care for myself?
Yeah, no, I like that. And kind of being proactive for sure. And because self-care always changes when the seasons change, like it's inevitable. It can't possibly stay exactly the same. And so I think that is a good thing to be thinking about. As a very much side note, it just occurred to me that I had two separate mini segment ideas for this podcast that I'll share with you after. But what you just said made me think of it. So for later.
Exciting. Okay.
Okay. So as we check in every week, we hope you are checking in with your self-care every week as well. Yeah, you gotta take care of yourself. Okay. It's time for us to get into our questions for the day.
We have some really good ones.
We do. And I know you all, if you've been listening for a while, you know, every time we do like the therapist Q&A, that we have to give the disclaimer that this is not a substitute for therapy at all.
We're not your therapist.
We are not your therapists. Even if we are actually your therapists, we're not your therapists in this capacity right now. And the reason that we always give this disclaimer is that therapists' role isn't to give advice. It's to help guide you toward a solution that works best for you, helping you get on that path for yourself, helping you build insight and awareness to come to a solution, if that's what you're looking for, that you can take ownership of. That's what's most important. So this is definitely outside of our typical role, but we're not therapists. I mean, while we are therapists, we're not doing therapy in this context. So we have a little bit of leeway to weigh in on questions in a way that looks different if someone were sitting in front of us in one of our offices bringing up these scenarios. So, you know, we always like to give that heads up.
Right. We might be a little more direct here than we would be in a therapy session, where we might be supporting our client to come to the answer themselves. Whereas here, like, we're here to answer your questions. That's what we're doing.
Yes. So do you want to read the first one?
Sure. Okay. Also, I like cut some of it a little bit, but I'm just like reword it. Does this okay?
I think so. Yeah.
So first question. When I shared that I lost my mother, which was at Christmas last year, a typical joyous time of the year, people, friends included, immediately started talking of the loss of their own mother. It feels like some macabre competition. For example, I was crying recently when a service person we were interviewing said, "I am not your mother," and I burst into tears. I had just lost my aunt too, and shared that, thinking I needed to share why I had burst into tears. She then shared how she had lost her mother and two brothers years ago in a span of 6 months. I didn't know what to say. I told her I was sorry for her loss. I felt like because I, quote unquote, only lost two people recently, that I shouldn't be crying, / I wasn't entitled to my grief. So the question is, should you tell people about your grief or not? Am I entitled to my grief? Should it be bottled up and not shared?
There's so much in this question. So thank you, listener, for sending it and for being so detailed with these examples. It sounds like navigating through this has been really challenging, and navigating through grief is always so complicated, no matter what. And so we really, really appreciate you writing in and asking these questions.
Yeah. And I mean, first of all, yeah, this is really vulnerable to have brought this up. It was also very vulnerable for you, the listener, to have tried to had tried to confide in somebody that you thought would respond in a way that you thought that would be helpful to you and like loving and comforting, and you got kind of shot back with something pretty cruel.
Do you think the intention was to be cruel?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, we don't know what was going on for this person other than they had experienced a loss too. Mm-hmm. They probably didn't have the capacity to hold it for our listener. And I think that's a huge thing to highlight here when it comes to grief, when it comes to confiding in other people, that if somebody's not able to hold space for you, hold space for what it is that you want to share with them, most of the time it has more to do with what's going on for them than what it is that you're sharing with them.
Right. I mean, the reality is that we as a society are really bad at grief. Like we don't talk about death at all, really. And so I think as a result, like people don't really know what to do when faced with death or with grief or loss. And so I do think that like sometimes people share certain things as a way to try to figure out how to respond in a helpful way. And it doesn't always hit, it doesn't always land. And, it's such a, again, grief is complicated, and it's so complicated because while it's something that we all will experience in our life, it is one thing that connects us all. And as you experience through sharing your examples, listener, that, you've been met with people telling you about their losses, that loss is something that we all experience. And yet at the same time, everyone navigates through it differently. So it can feel a little bit like, well, your loss isn't anything like my loss. And that's okay. It's not supposed to be. And I definitely understand what the listener wrote about feeling like it's some kind of competition. That's definitely something that I've heard my clients say is like, it feels like, well, I only lost my aunt and they lost their mother. And so like they're somehow allotted more grief or more time to grieve than I am. Like it does feel like there's this like disenfranchisement when it comes to the ability to actually feel and process your feelings. But again, because we as a society don't really talk about grief, I don't think we've really figured out like how to navigate the nuances around talking about loss.
Yeah. There's like a one-upmanship in like who's hurting more. And that doesn't have to be a part of this at all. But I totally get why this person's feeling like that it's a part of it, because this happens so often.
Right.
And yeah, it does have a lot to do with the lack of communication around grief and the process of it and the nuances between person to person.
Right. And, I always try to like give people the benefit of the doubt, which might to this listener feel invalidating. And for that, I apologize. But like, I always have to assume everyone's doing the best that they can. Like, I don't think I could do this work if I thought anything differently. And so in my mind, like the reason that people do this is because they don't know what else to say. And on the flip side, if you are hearing this listener say, like, this didn't feel good, this felt like almost like it took away her permission to grieve. Thank you again so much for sharing that, because that is such a common experience for people that are going through grief. And then they're met with these comments. Well, oh yeah, my mom died too. It's not empathetic. It's meant to be empathetic, but it's really unempathetic and not validating. And we would do such a better job of caring for one another if we could just tolerate the discomfort of someone telling you about their loss and you just sitting with it and not trying to make yourself feel more comfortable by like inserting your own experience as a way to relate, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to be direct about the first part of the question, should you tell people about your grief or not? Yeah, of course you should. The more we talk about, like what we're saying now is like, it's not talked about enough. It's not shared enough. People aren't educated on it enough. And I'm not saying that this listener, it's like your job to start teaching people about how to grieve, but the more you keep it inside, the more time you're going to need to process, the more difficult it's going to be to process. Mm-hmm. And it's just a matter of who you're telling and when you're telling them that will benefit you or not. But absolutely, you should tell people about your grief. Mm-hmm. Again, it just depends on who it is and when it is.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Keeping it inside is not going to be helpful to your ability to process and navigate through grief. And yeah, trying to be mindful of who you share it to is really important. And it sounds like for this listener, the loss being so recent, and maybe being more in an acute grief state, that it was so at the surface that kind of quickly brought to tears, and then feeling like you had to explain why. I'll say to the listener, you don't ever have to explain why. I understand why you felt like you had to, but you don't. And that's something that's earned through trust, to like explain why you're feeling a certain way. But yeah, I think, sure, of course, if you feel comfortable to talk about your loss and your grief, do that. And this is where I find that my clients get a little frustrated with this next piece of a suggestion, is if someone is not responding to you in a helpful way, to say that, to say like I really wish you could just, hold me in my grief right now. Or like, I am really sorry to hear about your mom also. And I'm still really working through like what's going on with like the passing of mine. So and that's really, really hard to do, but because everyone grieves differently, no one is going to know what you specifically need except for you. And I know that is a lot of labor and responsibility. And that's the only way that we can get kind of the care and support we need. And then, so long story short, your other question, am I entitled to my grief? 100,000% yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry that these experiences that you have made you doubt that, or made you even question that. But let two therapists tell you are absolutely entitled to your grief, no matter what it is. Your feelings are your feelings. Your feelings are valid no matter what, especially with grief.
I would just reiterate the same thing. So I couldn't agree more. So yeah, do your grieving. You need to do it. It's important to you. Obviously, these people were important to you, and whatever it is you're feeling around that loss is valid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And thank you for sharing this with us again. I imagine it really resonated with so many people who have also navigated through loss. So thank you for sharing that. And we're thinking of you, listener.
Yeah. And also, if you haven't checked out our episode with Jessica Desai, we have a great episode around grief. And she talks about the different ways that people grieve and the timelines and how there's not one timeline. Yeah, there's not one timeline for anyone going through any loss. And yeah, so definitely check. Actually, let me see what episode number that is. So it is episode number 16. So definitely check out that episode, What Healing Through Loss actually looks like advice from a grief expert. And that is with Jessica Desai. She is a therapist that works with us at Revive Center for Wellness, and she's amazing. She knows a lot about this subject. So check it out.
Yeah, go check that out. Thank you again. Okay. Are we ready for our next question?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, I'm just going to remind you all again, you can send your questions to wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com. This question: after I broke an engagement, my mother repeatedly said, "You missed your only chance to get married." How do you handle family and friends' comments about a breakup?
First of all, that must have hurt to hear. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like this listener was the one that did the breaking off of the engagement. Either way, that was probably not easy for them. Getting to a point where you're about to get married to somebody and then decide to end things, that's got to be really, really overwhelming for anybody going through that experience, whether you're on the receiving end of it or you're the one doing the breaking up. So that experience in itself already, whoa. And then to hear this, I mean, my goodness, that must have really hurt.
Right. Especially from someone that I'm just making an assumption that you are expecting to be kind of in your support system after making such a big, life decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. My immediate reaction when I read this was like, oh, like that sucks. Like that must have been awful, awful to hear. And I can't imagine that this is what the listener was anticipating, wanting, needing to hear after this, as you said. And we talked about on our navigating through a breakup episode, like breaking up with someone is really challenging to do. And often the breaker-upper doesn't get a lot of empathy or compassion. And it seems like that's what this listener was experiencing. This is really, really hard.
And also clearly it stuck out to them because, well, they wrote in that their mom said this to them repeatedly. Mm-hmm. And so not only does this sound like it's something really important to our listener, the person that broke off the engagement, not only does it sound like what's important to them is that they do get married and that they do have find this love, but it also sounds like it's really important to their mom, mm-hmm. And probably for a lot of different reasons. And it's probably important to our listener.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And to this listener, I'll say you are more than your marital status, than your relationship status. There's way more to you than that. And you're deserving of happiness and well-being within or without a relationship. And I feel like I really want to say that because it seems like this relationship or the relationship status seemed to be really defining, at least in terms of the commentary the listener was getting around ending the engagement. And so it's so courageous to choose yourself. Again, breaking off an engagement, I can't imagine that is an easy thing to do. And you are still enough and full and whole, even outside of, no matter what your relationship status is.
I mean, that sounds exactly like what this person probably wanted to hear, mm-hmm. Especially from their mom right after this happened. Mm-hmm. And listener, just know that Amy's not just saying that. That is meant, that holds so much meaning coming from her and coming from obviously the work that we do, but just understanding people and understanding how at a really sensitive time, at a really vulnerable time, how much more important it is to hear that in any way that it is, to hear you're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And the fact that maybe you're not feeling like you're okay right now is okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And I imagine this the experience of critical, judgmental, mean comments as a result of a breakup or any life decision isn't necessarily unique to this listener, but what can or could this listener do, or any of our listeners do, when they are faced with this kind of like onslaught of lack of support, criticism?
Well, I mean, it's one of those like easier said than done kind of scenarios, because it sounds like there's probably a dynamic here between our listener and our and their mother that it's not going to be, shifted around all in one, sentence from the listener, like in saying something like pretty much like what you just said, like, that's really not what I need to hear right now. Mm-hmm. What I need to hear is blank, or even just stepping away and giving yourself space from those people that you don't think are going to give you what you need in that time. Mm-hmm. Because I'm kind of guessing that this wasn't the first time that this mom said something like that to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So finding, essentially you're talking about boundaries, whether it's through communicating them in this isn't what I need to hear right now, or in a more physical sense, and in like disconnecting from the mom, and getting some space from that.
Yeah. And then in that space, I mean, because you can't avoid all comments, questions forever. And certainly not in the day and age we live in, where people can just find you through a message. It's a lot harder to avoid people. But really, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying to our listener who asked about grief, but when you pull away, when you are able to actually digest what this person said to you, thinking about that person as opposed to thinking about how this is a shot to you, thinking about why this person probably said this to you, why this person was so adamant about this being so important that you're never going to find anybody now.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, I was imagining processing through that with one of my clients. And I guess the rebuttal would be like, why do I need to like essentially have empathy for, not empathy, but like understanding for why my mom was saying this shitty thing to me. And so that, I guess,
but the reason is it's just because whatever this person's mom is saying to you, like, it's not about you. This really has nothing to do with you. Same with the person asking about grief. When this person said, "I'm not your mother," that had nothing to do with what this person was going through. Mm-hmm. And so being able to just pull yourself away and say, like, okay, I know that whatever, like, you don't have to, go into therapy mode with your mom right after this and be like, whoa, what's going on for you to have said something like that to me? More so just to give you peace of mind and for you to feel more valid in your experience. Mm-hmm. To just be able to separate yourself from what it is that they said to you.
Right. Like, this is just my mom's archaic bullshit kind of thing. And I guess along with that, I think that is really helpful, because I think that we can understandably begin to internalize, again, especially when it's your mother, right? Like someone who holds a lot of influence, that you can start to internalize what she's saying, even if you don't believe it, even if you know you made the right choice for yourself, right? That oh God, maybe they were right, or maybe there is something wrong with me, or maybe they're whatever. You just kind of internalizing all the insecurities, and especially within that dynamic, it's a pretty quick jump to do. So I think your suggestion around looking at the context a little bit more clearly is super helpful. And the other thing I'm going to say, I don't know what you think about this, Catherine, but I would let yourself. Well, first, I didn't hear how the listener felt about what her mom said. I'm projecting and I'm saying it's angry or hurt. Yeah. And And I would let yourself get angry. Not that you need to explode at your mom, or not that you need to like even have it out in any way, but like give yourself the permission to like actually feel the disappointment, the grief around not having maybe the mom you needed in this situation, to feel your own sense of loss over the relationship that you've ended, like to actually feel your feelings and let yourself also sit with the anger that you might feel by getting this comment or these comments. Because I don't know, there's something in me and in what the listener wrote that's making me think that she is like second guessing having a reaction to what her mom said to her.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, like, yeah, she's definitely wondering, like, what am I supposed to do with this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm. So get mad.
Mm-hmm. Feel your feelings.
Feel your feelings. Maybe it's not bad. Maybe that's just me. I feel mad on your behalf. But yeah, feeling your feelings around the situation. And again, there's probably a range of feelings. And then the other thing I guess I'll say is to lean on your supports, that it seems like you didn't get support from your mom, but there may be other people in your life that you can, well, maybe vent about this situation with your mom too, or people that can give you a little bit more of what you want and need and hope to hear as you heal through this breakup.
All right. Well, again, thank you for taking the time to write in that question. We really appreciate it. We hope that was helpful for you. Let us know. Certainly, yeah, shoot us another email and let us know if that did anything for you. We hope so. And for those of you who haven't written in yet with questions, we would love you to. We would love to try and answer, see what we can do. And that would be for you to email wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com.
Yes, please. Thank you for such great questions. They were so great and so vulnerable. Thank you. And thank you for listening. Everyone who's listening, thank you so much. Thank you for following along on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, for your ratings, for your reviews, for sharing our podcast with a friend. We appreciate that so much. Also, make sure you are checking out and subscribing to our YouTube channel, Revive Center for Wellness, where you can watch our episodes of this podcast every week as well. So hello on YouTube if you're there. You can also watch our weekly bonus podcast that drops exclusively on YouTube, Reactivity TV, which is where Catherine and I have a lot of fun giving our therapist takes to all things TV and movies, everything that's trending and you're watching, we're watching too. So check that out. Also, give us a follow on Instagram at ReviveCFW. You can also follow Catherine at Catherine Van Eyck, me at Amy Albero LCSW. Check out our website, ReviveCFW.com. And one more time, just for good luck, you can send your emails to wishingyouwell@revivecfw.com. Until next time, we are wishing you well.